Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's been a while since I've uploaded a video, so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what I've been reading lately. First up is A Hunger Artist by Franz Kafka. This is a short story about a man who fasts for a living. Basically, he would stay in a cage and not eat anything while people watched. Think of a early 20th century David Blaine who performs in front of an audience. The Hunger Artist is very dedicated to his craft, and he becomes obsessed with breaking his fasting record. At first, his fasting performances were popular, but later on, interest suddenly declined, and nobody came to his performances anymore. It's at this point that the story takes a darker turn, which is not surprising considering this is Kafka. There's a lot packed into this little story, but what stands out to me the most is the tragic nature of work. I'm sure that even during Kafka's time, there were cliches about starving artists. And Kafka himself had to work at an insurance company because he couldn't afford to live off of his writings. Here, starvation is the art, so that's a nice little irony. But I think that this story is not just for artists or creatives, and it can resonate with anybody who's trying to do something meaningful in their career, but is getting thwarted by dehumanizing and corrosive outside forces. There are other themes here apart from work-related ones, and in a lot of ways this story is pretty similar to The Metamorphosis, which is Kafka's more famous novella. Sometimes it's even overtly similar. So if you like The Metamorphosis, you might want to check this out, even though I don't think that it's as good. To be honest, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anything with the emotional impact or originality of The Metamorphosis, so I'm not actually being harsh here. Next is A Sentimental Education by Gustave Flaubert. Here we meet a young man named Frederick who moves from the countryside to Paris. In the capital, he finds all kinds of political dissidents, artists, businessmen, and socialites. He also falls in love with a married woman named Madame Arnoux, who becomes his singular obsession throughout the novel. So this is a tiny bit like Love in a Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, if it was drenched in nihilism and set in Paris. The plot consists of various encounters among the characters over the course of many years. Many, if not most of these people, are not likable. The businessmen are greedy, the revolutionaries are vapid, and Frederick himself is completely uninterested in most things other than stealing Madame Arnoux away from her husband. But the way that Flaubert writes, even the unlikable characters are interesting. You feel sorry for Frederick and almost root for him, even though what he wants is adultery. The entire novel feels really satiric, as if Flaubert is poking fun at people who want to create the perfect society or to have the perfect love. But there's also a real sadness here, a failure to launch, where genuine feelings are twisted into cynicism and duplicity because they can't be put to use to anything else. Apart from the characterization, I really liked how Flaubert wrote some of the pivotal scenes. He can really write romance and heartbreak well, except that there's always an undercurrent of satire beneath. That said, I do think that the book dragged, particularly in the latter half. So, although I liked it, I can't say that it's a new favorite. Next is The Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder. This book won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1928 and was one of the most popular books of that year. and I'm sorry to say I don't know why. The story begins with Brother Juniper seeing the eponymous bridge collapse and kill 5 people. Brother Juniper is a Franciscan friar who is preoccupied with scientifically proving divine providence. For years, he's been trying to figure out whether people live and die by accident or by some kind of plan. Because he wants empirical proof, he decides to research the lives of these 5 people to figure out whether their deaths were part of God's plan. After this introduction to Brother Juniper, we leave him until basically the end of the novel, and the narrative shifts to the 5 people that fell off of the bridge. And here's where the story dropped off for me. Even though the characters were interesting enough and the writing style wasn't bad, there weren't any standout themes or strong narrative that bound their separate stories together. The ending seems to say that what connects everything is love, and I can see that. There are various representations of love here. The love of a parent for a child, the love between brothers, romantic love, but it all feels very surface level and not really enough to bind all of these stories together in a coherent narrative. Next up is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Luis Zafon. This was published in 2001, so I'm finally getting some contemporary books in my video, if 20 years ago can be called contemporary. The story begins with a bookseller taking his son to the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, a secret library in Barcelona that houses rare and out-of-print books. The boy takes out a book called The Shadow of the Wind. After reading it, mysterious things start to happen in his real life that seem to come out straight out of the book. When I picked this up, I was craving some dark academia with a hint of the supernatural, which is what the synopsis on the back of the book hinted at. Also, people rate this very highly on Goodreads, with over 500,000 ratings, so it had to be awesome, right? Well, no. In all 565 pages, there was almost nothing academic and very little supernatural and barely anything about the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which I was really interested in. Instead, this is a mystery slash thriller slash coming-of-age story where the main character runs around all over Barcelona looking to find out what happened to the author of The Shadow of the Wind. While the central mystery was enough to keep me reading until the very end, I didn't like the final plot twist and reveal. Also, I felt like this book dragged a lot, and I think it would have been a much better book if it was less than half its size. So unfortunately, I can't say that I recommend it. Next is How to Read and Why by Harold Bloom. Harold Bloom was a famous literary critic and professor at Yale University. He wrote a lot of books on literary criticism, and so far I've only read 2. One is Hamlet Poem Unlimited, which is very short, a study of Hamlet, and this is the second one, and this is actually a properly long book of literary criticism. In it, Harold Bloom launches a broadside at ideological approaches to literature and tries to show how various literary works enrich our lives outside of ideology. So, is it convincing? That's actually a hard question to answer. On the one hand, I feel like the arguments he made in the book were not as analytic as I expected. On the other hand, I feel very presumptuous evaluating a literary critic's work when I've only read 2 of his books. So I think that I'm going to hold off on an opinion of this until I've read more of Harold Bloom's work. Next is The Magus by John Fowles. I picked this up because I've heard good things about John Fowles' writing, and because the synopsis on the back promised an unusual experimental book, which I'm always on the lookout for. Here we follow Nicholas, a young Englishman who is becoming more and more bored of his country. One night at a party, he meets a young woman named Allison. Even though Allison is engaged, they begin a relationship. Allison, who in her own words is very promiscuous, seems to fall in love with Nicholas and wants him to marry her. Nicholas, on the other hand, has more conflicting feelings. One day he finds her repulsive, the next he is offering marriage to her. Ultimately, he decides that he's just done with England and accepts a job on a remote Greek island. When he and Allison break up, he gloats that he has won because, in the end, she wanted him more than he wanted her. So you can see this Nicholas is kind of a bastard, but I don't mind since the story is interesting so far. After Nicholas moves to the Greek island, he becomes lonely and depressed, mostly because none of the local girls are giving him the time of day. After a botched suicide attempt, he meets a wealthy and mysterious man named Kolkis. Kolkis claims to be psychic. As Nicholas spends more time in Kolkis' mansion, weird things start happening, and it seems like Kolkis himself is summoning ghosts or visions. So here is where the book starts losing me. The weirder things get, the stupider Nicholas seems to become. When Kolkis summons the ghost of a beautiful girl, Nicholas immediately starts lusting after her. And this is after he is told that the girl doesn't do anything that Kolkis doesn't allow her to do. Nicholas doesn't care, he just wants to bed the ghost. So at this point I'm thinking, this book is over 600 pages long and about 26 hours on audiobook. Do I really want to spend more time in this magical sex mansion? And the answer to that was no. This book just felt too long and too pointless. I would consider picking up another book by John Fowles because I did enjoy the first few chapters. However, The Magus is a DNF for me. The book I'm currently reading, apart from all the other works that I've listed in my yearly goals video, is Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, and it is very bright against my ring light that I'm still learning how to use. Dr. Bostrom has an MA in Philosophy and Physics, an MS in Computational Neuroscience, and a PhD in Philosophy. In this book, he discusses the prospect of humanity creating an entity that surpasses human general intelligence. We already have computer programs that can exceed human-level intelligence in many fields. For example, there are programs that can reliably beat chess grandmasters at chess. But this book is specifically concerned with superintelligence as it relates to general human intelligence, which means the cognitive capacity to do all the things that people do, but better. So far, I really like it. I'll probably do a standalone book review because this topic is so prescient right now with AI taking over the creative and writing worlds in a way that many people never expected. So that's it for the reading update. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you next time.